September 21, 1327. A shroud of mist hung over the forested hills of Gloucestershire. Berkeley Castle loomed like a tombstone against the pre-dawn sky, its silhouette jagged and cold. Inside those thick walls, a man once crowned with gold now lay sleepless, chained and broken. He had once ruled England. Tonight he would die not with sword or axe but with heat, the kind that sears from within, the kind that leaves no mark but tells no lie. The stench of damp straw and mold clung to the air in Edward's cell. Rats scurried in the shadows. His once fine robes, now rags, barely warmed him against the chill that rolled through the stone chamber. He had not seen the sun in weeks. The only light came from torches held by guards who refused to meet his eyes. He was no longer Your Majesty, not since his abdication. Now he was simply Edward of Carnarvon, a man imprisoned by his wife and her lover, a man destined to be erased. Outside, hooves clattered in the courtyard. A cloaked messenger arrived, his presence brief. A nod was exchanged. A purse of silver passed hands. Inside, in a room near the cell, the constables of the castle whispered. Their orders were not to let Edward die of sickness, not to let him waste away. They had something cleaner in mind, cleaner yet crueler. He was not fit to rule. His reign brought only shame and ruin. But this is no death for a king. No one escapes their fate. Edward of Carnarvon ascended to the throne of England at just 23 years old, succeeding his formidable father, King Edward I, known as the Hammer of the Scots. From the moment he took the crown in 1307, Edward II's reign was marked by contrasts of ambition and weakness, loyalty and betrayal, love and hatred. It would ultimately culminate in one of history's most infamous executions. Born on April 25, 1284, Edward grew up under the shadow of his father's towering legacy. Edward I had been a warrior king, renowned for his military campaigns and administrative reforms. But young Edward was different. His temperament leaned toward indulgence rather than discipline, passion over pragmatism. He was charismatic, generous, and deeply loyal to those he loved. But these qualities often blinded him to the realities of power. From an early age, Edward formed intense personal bonds that set tongues wagging throughout the court. None were more controversial than his relationship with Piers Gaveston, a handsome Gascon knight whom Edward elevated to unprecedented heights despite widespread disapproval. Their closeness scandalized the nobility, who saw Gaveston as little more than a manipulative interloper. To them, Gaveston represented everything wrong with Edward's rule: favoritism, extravagance, and disregard for tradition. When Edward became king, tensions between him and his barons escalated rapidly. Gaveston was exiled multiple times, only to be recalled each time thanks to Edward's unyielding devotion. By 1312, however, patience had worn thin. A coalition of powerful lords captured and executed Gaveston, leaving Edward grief-stricken and politically weakened. This event marked the beginning of a downward spiral that would eventually cost Edward his throne and his life. Yet even after losing Gaveston, Edward continued to alienate those around him. His second great attachment to Hugh Despenser the Younger sparked another wave of resentment among the nobility. Like Gaveston, Despenser wielded immense influence over the king, using his position to enrich himself and consolidate power. Meanwhile, Edward's neglect of governance led to disaster abroad. In 1314, the English army suffered a humiliating defeat at the Battle of Bannockburn against Robert the Bruce of Scotland, further eroding confidence in the king's leadership. By 1326, discontent had reached a boiling point. Queen Isabella, Edward's estranged wife, returned to England accompanied by her lover, Roger Mortimer, a disgraced nobleman with ambitions of his own. Together, they rallied support from disaffected barons and invaded the kingdom. Within months, they had seized control, forcing Edward to abdicate in favor of his teenage son, Edward III. Thus ended the reign of Edward II, but not his story. After his forced abdication, Edward was imprisoned first at Kenilworth Castle and later transferred to Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire. Though officially stripped of his title, he remained a potent symbol of resistance. Rumors spread that loyalists were plotting to restore him to the throne, prompting Mortimer and Isabella to take drastic measures. They could not risk allowing Edward to live, not when his mere existence threatened their fragile hold on power. Berkeley Castle, perched atop a hill overlooking the River Severn, was chosen for its remoteness and impenetrability. Its thick stone walls and narrow windows made escape nearly impossible. Yet even here, Edward retained traces of his former dignity. Accounts describe him as tall and striking, with piercing blue eyes and a regal bearing that belied his current circumstances. Despite his captivity, he reportedly maintained a sense of humor, engaging in spirited debates with his jailers and occasionally composing poetry. However, conditions within the castle grew increasingly harsh. Edward's keepers, Thomas de Berkeley and John Maltravers, received explicit instructions to ensure that the former king posed no threat. Over time, their treatment became more severe. Food was rationed, visits restricted, and physical abuse rumored. Still, Edward endured, clinging to the hope that fortune might yet turn in his favor. That hope was dashed in September 1327, when orders arrived from Mortimer himself. Edward was to die, but not quietly or cleanly. Mortimer understood the need for plausible deniability. If Edward simply vanished or succumbed to illness, suspicions might linger. No, his death needed to appear accidental or, better yet, self-inflicted. And so, one of history's cruelest methods of execution was devised. On the night of September 21, 1327, darkness enveloped Berkeley Castle. Inside, Edward lay awake, restless and uneasy. He had heard footsteps echoing through the corridors earlier, seen unfamiliar faces among the guards. Something felt amiss. When the door to his cell creaked open, he tensed, instinctively recoiling as 4 men entered. Among them were Sir John Maltravers and William Ockley, tasked with carrying out the deed. They approached silently, their expressions unreadable. Edward tried to speak, but fear choked his words. Rough hands grabbed him, dragging him onto the bed and pinning him down. Struggling proved futile. There were too many of them. Panic surged through him as he realized what was about to happen. One of the men produced a long iron poker, its tip glowing white-hot from hours spent in the fire. Edward's eyes widened in horror as comprehension dawned. This was no ordinary punishment. It was humiliation, torture, and murder combined. The poker was meant not only to kill but to destroy any shred of kingly dignity he still possessed. As the instrument neared his body, Edward screamed, thrashing wildly in a desperate bid for freedom. But escape was impossible. With calculated precision, the men positioned the poker at his abdomen, pressing it firmly against his flesh. Smoke rose as skin blistered and charred, the sickening smell filling the room. Edward's cries turned guttural, raw shrieks of agony that echoed off the stone walls. Minutes passed like hours. Edward's struggles weakened until, finally, his body went limp. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the sheets crimson. The deed was done. The men stepped back, breathing heavily, their faces pale and drawn. One wiped sweat from his brow while another muttered a prayer under his breath. Then, without a word, they left the chamber, leaving behind the broken shell of a man who had once worn a crown. News of Edward's death spread quickly. though official accounts claimed he had died naturally of illness. Few believed the story. Too many details hinted at foul play, the suddenness of his demise, the secrecy surrounding it, the rumors whispered in taverns and marketplaces. Some said Edward's screams could be heard miles away. Others swore they saw smoke rising from the castle's towers. Mortimer and Isabella may have succeeded in eliminating their rival, but their victory was short-lived. Public outrage over Edward's treatment fueled growing discontent with their regime. In 1330, Edward III, now 18 years old, staged a coup, arresting Mortimer and executing him for treason. Isabella was spared but banished to a life of quiet retirement. Edward III worked tirelessly to rehabilitate his father's reputation, portraying him as a tragic figure undone by treachery rather than incompetence. Today, historians continue to debate the truth of Edward II's final days. Was he truly murdered with a hot poker? Or did his captors employ some other method, embellishing the tale to serve their purposes? Regardless of the specifics, one thing is certain. Edward's death remains one of history's most chilling examples of political brutality. The cell at Berkeley Castle still exists, cold, unadorned. Visitors describe an oppressive chill, a sadness that clings to the stone. There are no plaques describing what happened there, no official tours, but sometimes they say, when the wind howls through the halls and footsteps echo on bare stone, you can almost hear it. The muffled scream of a king, murdered not for what he did, but for who he was. They tried to hide the crime. They tried to erase the body. But the horror of Edward II's death became eternal. A dark tale whispered by firelight, recorded not by parchment, but by terror passed through generations. Some executions make history, others become legend. Edward II's story serves as both a cautionary tale and a meditation on the fragility of power. For all his flaws, he was a man who loved deeply and lived passionately, qualities that made him both admirable and vulnerable. In the end, it was not his enemy's strength but his own inability to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval politics that sealed his fate. As we reflect on his life and death, we are reminded of the fine line between ruler and ruled, victor and vanquished. Kings may wear crowns, but they bleed like any other man, and sometimes they burn. Thanks for watching. For more historical dives like this, please subscribe.